Hello all. Today we're going to learn how to read the map. As a new player, the map is very daunting, it's very hard to understand, but I'm going to try and make it simpler. I'm going to do my best. It is difficult, ultimately. A lot of reading the map is just experience, as shitty as it is to say, but I'll try and give you some basic rules so that you know what you're doing. First things first, at the top of the screen, you will see a tab displaying the current continent name, as well as all the other continents currently available. Continents with a banner behind them of a faction means they're locked. They also have a red lock symbol, and ones that are currently open will not have any symbol beside them. So this is being recorded on Emerald. It is currently 8:05 in my time, 11:05 server time, so this is basically prime time. It's close to the end, and this should give a decent representation of what the average map looks like. First things first. Countries, hexes that are in blue are NC, purple, Vanu, red, TR. You will also see funny little lines going between each base. You will see them. They will be very funny. This is called the Lattice. They will be colored in whatever faction currently owns them, and yellow lines means that a base can be captured along that lattice. For example, this hex right here, Woodman ASC, is connected to Moss Ridge Command Center, meaning a capture could be initiated between these hexes because they are connected. That's basically how lattices work. You will see fights happen on the front lines of these lattices. Next thing. Looking at fights. Finding a fight as a new player is rough. Ultimately, it is a big matter of experience of knowing which fights are going to be good, but I'm going to try and explain some basic parameters as to what I believe create good fights. So, first things first, looking at the Zigurat, there are a bunch of orange bubbles around it, meaning the game thinks there's a lot of player activity there, and they'd be right. There are 48 to 96 enemies in the hex, and 24 to 48 allies in the hex, as shown by the region tab on the right. You can also see a population pie chart, showing that there are currently 29% NC there, and 72% Vanu. So, looking at this, I can tell you right now that this is not a good fight. In general, any population chart that is more than 60-40 in one direction is generally going to be bad. It generally indicates that there is an overwhelming presence of one faction there, and likely you will just be beating your head against a wall trying to attack or defend. In general, if population is skewed that heavily towards one faction, there is usually a Zerg going on, which means a large amount of players, and it will not be a good fight. Rarely you can make these work if you're a veteran and you know how to manipulate them to have more targets, but as a new player, you should stay away from these. They are not fun to defend, they are not fun to attack, because you will either be getting spawn killed repeatedly, or you will get to do nothing. So, we can tell the Ziggurat will not be a good fight. Looking at the Lattice, and given that there's a good chunk of NC population in Zot's agriculture, we can assume that a fight will probably be pushed up into Zot's. This isn't a guarantee, but it would be a safe bet to assume there may be a fight starting at Zot's in the future, and we should keep an eye on it. Moving over to Bravada PMC. There's not as many hotspots here, there's not as many players. There's 24 to 48 enemies and 24 to 48 allies. The pop chart is 56% NC and 44% Vanu. Now, I am not at this fight, but I'd be willing to bet this is a decent fight. The cap timer is slow and just moved back a little bit, meaning that there's probably some good contesting going on over points here. Even though there is a decent chunk of NC players, more than Vanu players, I would be willing to bet that this is at least a decent fight. However, it may turn into a Zerg. It's just something to be aware of, that this fight may very well skew, especially if a big squad decides to show up. But for now, I'd be willing to bet that this is at least a decent fight. It's probably pretty okay. Looking up the lane now at Moss Ridge Command, given that it is 1 to 12 players in the hex, there are no allies, and it is a single cap, I'd be willing to bet this is less than 4 players, probably just trying to capture the base. These would not be fun because there are good odds that whoever is currently attacking this base is probably playing like a rat and will be waiting for you, and I would not recommend defending this whatsoever. Leave this for another squad to go cap. It's not worth being the sole player trying to defend a hex. It just would not be fun. Moving up the NCTR lattice, there's really nothing. Everything here is 1 to 12 fights, which are generally not fun and are not really like PlanetSide, because you probably installed PlanetSide to be in the big fights, and 1 to 12 fights will not be this. So we're just going to immediately discount all of the fights that don't have at least 12 to 24 players in them, because they're more likely not going to be fun. There's a cutoff base in the middle here, Nason's Defiance. You'll see it's dark blue. and it's not connected to any other NC territory. This means that it's cut off, it means that you cannot spawn there if you are not already within the hex, and this is just lost. You can discount this from existing. Moving on to the Vanu TR side, we're going to look at Cairn Station. Now, Cairn is interesting. Obviously, I can't see the split of each faction, but I'd be willing to bet it's about 48 to 96 on both sides. And given the pie chart is 45 to 54, it looks pretty decent. Now, this is probably an okay fight. The population is balanced, but because of the sheer amount of players, there's a good chance that there are going to be vehicles around, and the fight is just going to be too cluttered. There is such a thing as too many players. Cairn may be a decent fight, and it is ultimately going to be a solid option, but it's probably not going to be amazing. It'll be fun because there's lots of players around and it's a big battle, but I don't think it's going to be that enjoyable of a fight. In fact, it looks like Vanu have started really populating this hex, so I'd be willing to bet this fight is coming to an end. Moving down to Vital Stockpile, I think this is probably a very good fight. As you see by the chart, it's 24 to 48 enemies in the hex, and it's 53-47 in terms of population distribution. This is probably a solid fight. It's probably 12 to 16 players on each side, and it looks reasonably balanced. I'd be willing to bet that Vital is probably a solid fight right now. Of course, the catch to all of this, all of what I've just told you, is that this is purely going off population. We don't know how many vehicles there are in the hex, what kind of players are in the hex. We purely know what the population split is. In my experience, fights that are usually about even population and 24 to 48 players on both sides tend to be the most likely to have good fights. This is not a be-all end-all. You can have absolutely terrible fights even with even population, and you can have good fights with tons of players even if the population is unbalanced. This is just a general rule I go by, and what I've learned in experience over the time playing. For example, looking at this spawn here, we had a couple spawns here at the Zigurat. They've disappeared now, but there were a couple Sunderer spawns. This is probably a field fight. We can tell this by seeing there's 24 to 48 players in Zots that are NC, and there are 24 to 48 players in the Zigurat, which is Vanu. Given that the Sunderer locations are here, I'd be willing to bet there is a field fight somewhere in this central hex. We will draw it with a big yellow circle. There's probably a field fight going on here. Now, I personally don't enjoy these, but you may find them fun. It's just important to recognize that is probably what's going on there. A couple of other explanations while we're here. You will see certain facilities with names on the map that stand out, such as Nom Amp Station. These are major facilities. They typically have longer capture times, and they're generally designed to accommodate more players. That's all you really need to know about them, but just note that they are generally big bases and will generally require a lot of players to capture. Other things to note. You will probably see these funny little icons on hexes. Those are materials for outfits, and you should not worry about them. You will not need to worry about them for a very long time. In fact, I want to take this time to talk about the filters tab in the top right. You can turn on or off the terrain. You can turn on or off facility names, which I would not do. It's very nice to keep them on. You can turn off the lattice, which I would also not do. Territory control is handy to have. It just makes the map far more defined. You can turn off outfit resources safely if you are not an outfit leader, and if you're watching this video, I doubt you are. I would turn off outfit resources. Hotspots can be wrong, but I'd recommend having them on. It makes it very easy to see where players are at a glance. And Influence Cloud is a personal setting. It just really makes the map more vibrant. I really like having it on. Most people like having it off. That is purely up to you. The grid is an entirely personal option. I don't run it, but I'm sure some people do. You can also toggle heat maps, so you can see where the average activity is on the map. I don't really like this as a map view because it kind of just does what Hotspots already does, but it's there if you want it. You will also sometimes see these big ships on the map. These are bastions. There can only be one per faction active at a time. You don't really need to worry about these other than they are a big fuck-off ship, and they will usually head to one of the larger fights on the continent. They are controlled by players, but you can safely assume they'll head towards a larger fight. For example, this bastion looks like it's heading to Outpost Lambda, which is a terrible fight, by the way. It's 48 to 96, but the pop chart is 81 to 19. This is a bad fight. This is probably just a spawn room camp. Don't ever go to these. They are never, ever worth going to. Looking at TAC on storage, It's 42 TR, 58 Vonu. The fight will end soon, but if I'd caught it earlier, I'd be probably willing to bet it's okay. It's probably not anything great. It's likely that it's a spawn camp. In fact, given that the population chart just turned to 64 or 37, I'd be definitely willing to assume it's a spawn camp. It could have been okay earlier, but it might not be okay anymore. That was a whole lot of words. One last example. Hey, Skydock. This is 24 to 24 on both sides, 45 to 55. However, NC are defending it safely, which leads me to believe it's probably a decent tug of war over the capture points. I'd be willing to bet it's probably a decent fight, but it looks like TR are probably going to start dumping in population soon. This game is ever-evolving. I know that was a whole shit ton of words and explanation, and I'm sorry, feel free to go back and rewatch stuff. But the map is complicated. It is a very, very complicated topic. I've tried to kind of explain what generally makes a good fight and what things generally are, but please leave comments if you have questions. It's really hard to read the map, and ultimately, as a new player, you're going to struggle. However, on the top left here, your deploy screen, if you are currently dead, there is this join combat button. You can also activate it by pressing J. This will take you to what the game believes is the best fight along Hex. If you don't know where to go, it is always safe to press join combat. It might drop you at a bad fight, but it will at least send you somewhere. In general, as soon as you enter the map, pressing J to immediately get to a fight is not a bad option. Because otherwise you might just walk out and not really see anything, and if that happens, my condolences. So, press J for a fight, it just won't always be a good one. If you want to look for good ones, either follow the advice I've heeded, or join a squad and follow the leaders around. It is important to note that some squads are Zerg squads, where they will just send a ton of population to a base, and if you enjoy this gameplay, that's up to you. Personally, I don't. Please, if you have questions, leave them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. It's very hard to talk about this in an easy way, and hopefully it was helpful to some degree. Thank you all, and I will see you all again another time.